All right, good evening and welcome to our first meeting of the year of the City of Topeka Youth Council meeting. We have a group of new members from this year, and we have some members that are remaining from last year. So with that, I am going to ask for the call to order. We're calling the meeting to order, and I'm going to ask for the roll call to be passed.
All right, Mayor De La Isla.
Here.
Council members Williams, I'm sorry. Are you here? Atkinson? Franklin? De La Isla?
Here.
McDonald?
Here.
Chung?
Here.
Van Dalsum?
Here.
I believe that is all, Mayor.
We seem to have quorum this evening. Thank you all for attending. I so appreciate all of you being willing to be part of the Youth Council. How many of you, before we get started, have had the experience of being in a meeting in which we kind of use, and I say kind of because we'll be flexible as we get going, Robert's Rules of Order? We have 1, 2, 3. Okay, so for those of you who are, okay, it seems like everybody pretty much is, but just so that you all know, we run the meetings with Robert's Rules of Order, and it's pretty simple. The chair, in this case is me, I will bring up the items, and then in order for us to have discussion, just raise your hand, and I will call on you for comments. And the City Council itself, we have a code of ethics pretty much that dictates that when we speak to each other about an issue, even when we disagree, we are respectful to each other, and it doesn't mean that we cannot say that we disagree with each other. It just means that we do so in a way that is not disrespectful to either the presenters or the other members of the body. And then if we have something that we are going to make an action item of, and you want to have an approval, like the thing that's coming up, which is our minutes of the last meeting, somebody in the group says that they make a motion, somebody seconds that motion, and after that, I'll pause to see if there's discussion, if you guys have questions of what you have in front of you. And then after that, I'll call for the vote. And I'll typically, we won't do roll call tonight. I think it's a lot easier if I say all in favor, say aye. And then those that are agree, say aye. And then I say all opposed, the same sign. If you don't agree, then you say aye. And then we keep moving the meeting that way. Do you guys have any questions? Okay, so we're ready to get cooking. The first item is approval of the September 22nd TopCity Youth Council meeting minutes. Do we have any questions, corrections, or comments on those minutes? See no questions or comments, what is the pleasure of the governing body?
I motion to approve.
We have a motion for approval by Councilwoman De La Isla. Do we have a second?
A second.
We have a second by Councilwoman Chung. Do we have additional comments or questions or corrections for the minutes? Seeing none, we proceed by voting. All of those in favor of adopting the minutes of the last meeting say aye. You have to unmute to do so.
Aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Seeing no opposition, the minutes pass unanimously. At this point in time, we are moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is presentations. For the general public who is watching these meetings, the rest of the youth members that are watching the meeting, the way that this agenda is built every quarter is in collaboration with the Youth Council. The mayor nor the staff give ideas to the Youth Council with regards to what they are going to learn or discuss. After each meeting, we have a conversation and we kind of ask what the students want to learn about. And this month, they have chosen 3 topics. The first one is going to be presented. Our job as staff is then to provide experts in order for them to be able to have discussion and then consider items that they want to bring to the council for discussion and hopefully ratification in some instances. So the first one that we're going to discuss is examining racism and social change. And for this, we have the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Washburn University. It is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Danielle Dempsey-Swopes. Ms. Dempsey-Swopes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I am I am so impressed with you all, you young people who have given your time and your energy and your talent to this council and to this effort. And I appreciate it as a citizen of Topeka, and I am hopeful that the city council and the citizens of Topeka appreciate it, because we know that you young people could be doing something else and be involving yourselves in something else and be concerned about other things and not the well-being of your community. So I commend you for that. I think that is fabulous. I, as our esteemed mayor said, I am the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Washburn University, and I'm going to share my screen with you because I have a short presentation. Now, you know that you all have asked for a huge topic. There are actually two topics that are really hard to talk about in 20 minutes. Racism and social justice. So what I tried to do, can I share my screen now?
Taylor, could we help Ms. Dempsey Swopes to share her screen?
Okay, there we go. So what I really thought I would do is I would focus on the elements of social justice as a whole and addressing the social justice issues in the community and helping you all to have the right kind of plan, the right kind of strategy to address social justice, of which one of those issues might be racism. It may be sexism, it may be homophobia, it could be something else, but you can use this framework to address many of the challenges that you have. We want to have me back again. We can have a follow-up discussion that focuses purely on racism. And the reason why we have to do that in two different steps or two different sessions is because racism comes with a history that is so huge, it's very difficult to talk about the two together. So I tried to kind of separate these issues. What I really want to focus on right now is to make sure that you're primed for this discussion on racism with an understanding of what it means to be woke. Because once you're woke and once you have some of these elements of wokeness and you're working through those and working with the issues, the elements of social justice, then you are really ready to tackle racism. Does that make sense? So we don't have a lot of time for group work together. If you all were in a class, I would have lots of work for you to do, but we won't do that this evening. But feel free to stop me anytime and ask questions, and I'll be asking you questions as we go along, because I certainly want this to be as interactive as possible. Okay, so we love you, we're glad you're here, but we want you to be woke, and we want to wake up a whole lot of Topeka, right? We want them to appreciate diversity. We want them to have their cultural intelligence that's here and bring it way up here. We want them to understand what social justice really is, but more importantly, what I think you all want and what I'm hoping that you will do as young people is take the lead and support where you can, but take that action that actually addresses racism. So while we'll have a fundamental discussion about the definition of racism at a later date, I think what's important is that you have this understanding, this foundation for tackling this great big thing in the first place. So I hope that makes sense. Now, pundits and different people in the news have different definitions of wokeness, but what we really use in the social justice community is this state of awareness of what's going on, what's happening in community, and a state of awareness about these particular issues, about equity, about race, about gender, about economic status. And along with that state of awareness, that people have a willingness to learn more. They're open to what's challenging and what's troublesome about these issues, but they're also open to the ways that we create change, and they're ready for action, and they're ready to move, and they're ready to shake things up in this community. I hope that's where you guys are as well. You want to align yourself with these people who have this high level of wokeness, this cultural intelligence, this confidence. They also have empathy, right? They have a really huge understanding about how racism, let's say in Topeka high schools, affects the students and affects their abilities to be successful and affects their ability to graduate, right? So while, again, that definition of racism is important and understanding history behind racism is important, what you really want to focus on is developing this community of people with empathy, right? Because without that empathy, without some of this wokeness, you can't address the racism in the first place. You're never going to get there. So that's what we're going to talk about. You want people that are creative. You want people who are right there with you, rolling up their sleeves to collaborate and work to address racism. You want them to be woke. We have folks who are asleep, unfortunately. So I want you to just take out a pen and paper, and I want you to write down the names of 3 people that you know who go through life in this blissful state of ignorance about everything but their own world, right? Because these people in this blissful state of ignorance, it doesn't matter what you know about racism, you're not going to be able to convince them of it, right? They are so ignorant of racism that you can't get there. You can't even have that discussion, right? You've got to get them to a certain level of wokeness so that you can even have the conversation. They don't know the struggles about racism in this community. So again, you might think of one person who's in this blissful state of unawareness. Write down the name of a person who just is clueless about the racism that exists in this community. They just don't know. And not that they're bad or they are wrong, but again, that they are clueless. They're completely unaware. And then you might write down the name of a third person who just lives in a very narrow focused world without any interaction with people who are different from them, right? These are all the people who are asleep. They're not particularly woke. And no matter what you learn or understand about racism, you're not going to be able to convince them of it until they get to a certain level of wokeness with you. This is what you're striving for. You want people who can advocate with you. You want people that are at least ready to listen. You want them to develop a place where they have some courage to ask questions and show that they care. And you also want to work with people who are awake enough to know that you students of color, students on the council, students who are always doing this work to address racism and to address the social justice issues, that you can't do it alone. And it's unfair to make you always have to be the people to speak up and educate everybody else in the space. You want people woke enough and ready to educate themselves. So this is a quick video that talks about the people that you want to be woke. Now, as these ladies talk about the level of wokeness that's necessary to do this work in racism and social justice, I want you to write down the names of 3 other people who embody the kinds of qualities that these ladies are going to speak about in the video. Okay, everybody ready?
To me, being woke means that you recognize that the world is not a simple place, that everything is not all equal, that justice has not happened yet for everyone, and that there is a lot of work to be done.
Your eyes are wide open and you're paying attention.
And you're reaching out and speaking to people along the way and bringing them on to increase the amount of wokeness in your community.
Being woke is like eyes wide open, everything is clear. You can always see things that other people can just ignore or they just don't know.
Woke for me is just being outraged all the time and being able to stay human and feel outraged about injustice that is happening around me. It's being uncomfortable all the time and making sure that I'm speaking on behalf of those that can't speak up for themselves.
Some people know what's happening around them, but they are not doing anything. They're just like, well, it is what it is.
Yeah.
That's not what woke means, that you actually take it upon yourself to be like, this is something I need to fix.
Yeah.
I need to be part of the solution. And I mean, the thing is to do that, knowing that you can fix it, whatever your level or platform is, because there's always an opportunity for you to do just a little something to support them.
I also think about what words actually mean and how we give them power, right? Are you just going to wear it across your chest, but actually not live it out? Or are you going to give this word a meaning with your actions, with your daily commitment?
And I think in order for us to really progress, we're going to need people to really step out of their comfort zones and have those uncomfortable conversations and not just live in a space where they get to preach to people who already understand what it means.
Couldn't agree more.
I think to be woke means that you are aware of the issues and the world around you. I believe it means that you are engaged in the work of justice.
This is a time where we can't afford to be asleep. We have to be all the way alert.
Without action on the knowledge that we have now, our world will never change. And we need that more than ever.
So you guys recognize a few people in that video, right? Who did you recognize? Anybody want to take a guess?
Shonda Rhimes.
Yep, Shonda Rhimes. Who else? I think the first or the second lady who spoke was Trayvon Martin's mom. Did anybody recognize Linda Sarsour? She's also a Muslim American woman who's spoken out on Muslim American community and Muslim American rights, Arab American rights. So they talked about the qualities of people who can address racism, right? They are people who have their eyes wide open. And you got to understand that there's going to be lots of work to do. Now, most people, when I have a discussion with them about racism and about being woke, they create these two lists, right? The people on the one hand on your list who are clueless. And hopefully when you watch the video, you wrote down 3 more people who have a higher level of wokeness, right? You got your 2 lists. Both groups, no matter which group that you fall in, you got to be educating yourself. You got to be learning constantly. You got to grow and you got to show your care in the community. You guys have a great start by just being here tonight and by serving on this council. Now you've got your 2 lists. You've got your people who are clueless and you've got your people who are woke. I want you to list 3 things that you think you could do to create change by doing one of either 2 things: collaborating with the people who got this high level of wokeness and converting the people who are clueless. So write that down next. While we talk about, and keep those lists in mind while we talk about these elements of social justice that really allow us to create that pathway towards equity, right? Because we don't want equality. We have this notion that people are equal. They have the same opportunities. I would argue that, but the picture there, we have the 3 people, they both eat, everybody gets the same thing, right? They each get boxes to stand on. But because the people are different, they have different needs. And so sometimes, to be fair, you treat different people differently, right? One person really needs no box at all. The other person can use the box, and then the other person really, really needs the box in order to participate in society at all, or participate in watching the ball game, right? And we have to keep in mind that equitable solutions in our community may not be equal. But you start that by having, first of all, some self-love for yourself and some cultural knowledge with who you are. You cannot address racism without knowing who you are and understanding where your bias comes from. And I don't care if you're African American or if you're Native American or if you're white, we all belong to a racist society. And again, this is where we have to have the longer conversation about the history of America, where people came, found a place that was already inhabited by other people, eradicated those people, took over their place, and then brought enslaved people from another country. That history has a lasting effects, right? And a lasting legacy. And you have to understand who you are in that legacy and what effects it's had on you. Because I think the hugest challenge in America of addressing racism is when people say, I don't see it, I don't have it, I haven't experienced it. If you live here, you have, simply on this basis of our history. So understand and develop that self-love and your own cultural knowledge. Demonstrate your respect for other people. And then probably the hardest thing on this list is understand those opinions on both sides. Now, understanding the opinions on both sides doesn't mean that you agree with them, but it means that you understand that there is an opposite view, and that opposite view you have to address in order to convert. Remember the clueless people I talked about. You've got to understand where their cluelessness comes from and understand if they have they're clueless because they have an opposite view of what you do. And then you've got to raise awareness. The more that you can build the coalitions with these people who are really woke, you can raise awareness that helps change the minds of those clueless people and helps them understand how they can build that coalition and be a part of that coalition and be involved. When you're working with the people you're collaborating with, you're going to get access to resources, and you're going to build this group of people who can take action. You got to know who you are and know why you're in the fight. What racism have you experienced? Why is it that you're affected by racism? And what is it related to racism that affects you? Know that about you. Write those things down. Be able to articulate that when you're in a conversation with people. And then understand how your experiences with racism has affected your place in the community. Be able to articulate that. You can't convert the clueless people if they don't understand why it's been an issue for you, or if they don't understand how it's hampered you, or they don't understand the problems that it's caused. And then make sure you manage your own racism. I always go to the Harvard University website and take an implicit bias test. Harvard University studies the minds and brains of people all over the world and keeps track of, has these tests that you can take. They're really quick, like 3 and 4 minutes a piece, that help you understand where you might have biases for or against certain people, certain communities, or certain issues. So do that. That's part of educating yourself. And then make sure that in all of this, in all of your understanding racism, it's about understanding racism, but it's also about understanding your connection to broader humanity and your broader community. Always demonstrate that respect. I constantly looking for videos and looking for ways to kind of demonstrate things for students, and I don't have time to do it here, but if you watch the debate between our Vice President Kamala Harris and our former Vice President Pence, they did not agree about anything at all, right? At all, not even the slightest. But they were extremely respectful of one another. And I think it was really important, especially given the issues of race and gender for her and issues of race and gender for him, for them to have been people who demonstrated that. You're going to have to study that, and you're going to have to know that, and you're going to have to practice that in order to address racism. You cannot address it without being able to have that ability to demonstrate effect and respect. Now, it wasn't that neither one of them showed emotion, because they did. And Vice President Harris especially did. Just like me, African-American women are very demonstrative, right? We will always show our emotion, but she was still respectful. And I think that's really important. They didn't use profanity. They stuck to the issues, even though they were passionate about them, always used the appropriate names and titles for people. And they had knowledge of one another's positions, right? He already knew what she would say about certain things, and the same for her, because they're informed about what other people think. And so you have to do that as well. I love, 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 love the founders of Black Lives Matter. These are brilliant, amazing women who have created an enormously wonderful thing. Hopefully this will go to their website I want you to go to their website. If you want to know how to address racism and you want to study how they build coalitions, how they demonstrate respect, how they make reports, the demands that they make and why they make them, the resources that they have and why they have them, go to their website and study a lot of the work that they do. I also encourage you to learn about the founders themselves of Black Lives Matter. I think they wrote a book called When They Call You a Terrorist, right? Because there are people who have these perceptions that they're a terrorist group and that it's rooted in harm and in hatred. And that is absolutely not the case. And so be sure and educate yourself about, I believe, one of the most successful coalitions to address racism that we've ever had in our country. And now I got to figure out how to get back to my screen. Oops, that didn't work. Just one second. There we go. Right? Love, love, love Black Lives Matter. The other thing, I'm old, and that's okay, but I studied the civil rights coalitions in history. And one of the greatest coalitions was that between Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and John F. Kennedy Jr. Imagine the power of that kind of coalition. The president of the United States, the most recognizable and active desegregationist, nonviolent movement leaders in the world, and the most successful and energized, actually, and connected to the people activists in the Southwest of our country who were able to make great change, right? They built this coalition, they all worked together. So to eradicate racism, you're going to have to think about that group of people that you know have this high level of wokeness that can be a part of your coalition. Bring on the people who are clueless and provide the resources and power necessary to change, and then convince others in your community that they also have power to address these issues. So study that history and learn about the political processes that you have already available to you. The other really successful coalition, anybody know who this is? Surely you all know who this woman is. Okay, if you don't know, homework. This is Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams is the rock star coalition builder who galvanized the citizens of Georgia who historically never voted to get out and vote, right? She has been a champion for fighting voter suppression all across the country. And she not only did her work in Georgia, but she also did it in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. She did it in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And she also worked with folk in Arizona and New Mexico. Arizona, New Mexico, and what was the Nevada, right? The rock stars for addressing racism are out there. You have to build that coalition with them and you have to consolidate that power. And make sure too that you're not just addressing the issues of racism, but the tangential issues, the poverty, homelessness, the food insecurity. A lot of those issues are related and tangential to the racism that people experience in our community. So be broad in your strategy and in your plan, and continue to build that list of people who are important to you. Find those rock stars, and then make sure that these rock stars, these Stacey Abrams in our community, once you get a plan together, that they're reviewing that plan and giving you input. giving you perspective and advice of those things that you missed or that you don't understand. Again, you guys have got to identify what it is you want to address, and then create those mutual relationships that'll help you build that coalition to address it. Be as creative, innovative, collaborative as you can be. Challenge yourselves, join other organizations, read more, reach out more, think more, be critical, ask those questions, be sensitive at the same time, and be empathetic and understanding of those things that are different from what you've experienced. And allow other voices to be centered and to be heard that haven't been heard before. Continue to do the things that you're doing, and be sure to be aware of your own bias so that you can develop trust with other people. They won't trust you if they don't know you're managing your own stuff, right? So that's super important. Questions? Comments?
All right. Danielle, if you would be so kind to shut down the presentation so that I can see
Quick
everybody.
question
Yes, John,
for Danielle.
Yes.
Jamari.
Jamari, yes.
Yes. So as a African American male, what can I do to make sure there's a way where everybody can like have their own opinion? Like, how can I express where everybody can have speech, I should say? Like, how can I express that? That way everybody knows what this actually means and how we can get everybody woke, as you say.
You want to create those forums and create the opportunities for everybody to speak out and share what they think. If I'm rephrasing correctly, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
It's a great question, because it's hard to create what people like to call safe spaces, right? For everybody to truly say whatever it is that they think and whatever's on their mind. Because sometimes what's on people's minds is offensive, right? And so we have to balance this idea of come and say whatever you feel, but don't offend anyone, right? It's really, really tough. But I think that what you always want to do is start with small groups, and you want to remember that list of people who are woke?
Yes.
You want to have those people with you, and you want to have a number of those people who are woke to balance out the number of people who are clueless, right? So that you're supporting each other and you're backing each other up. And so that the woke people can also help you explain things that clueless people might not understand, right? And you don't have to do all of it yourself. Part of it is just developing good relationships. If you've got a good relationship with even some clueless folk or even some woke folk, just bring a few of them together and start to have those conversations and build that safeness to explore and to ask more questions and to have more conversations over time. It's not something you can do just necessarily all at once. Get everybody to come and just lay it all out there, right, the first time. It's something that you could gradually work up to.
Jamari, pardon me.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And just make sure that people too that are leading that discussion, make sure that the people leading the discussion are people that both of those groups respect, that both the clueless people respect and trust, and that the woke folks respect and trust.
Okay, thank you, Daniela.
You're welcome.
And Jamari, the other thing I was going to say, if there is a specific area that you're passionate about, one of the things that people often forget to do is to include the people that you are struggling with. Because what ends up happening is that you want to see change in something, but there's the same way that somebody may be clueless, like using the terms that Danielle used today, with regards to certain things, you also have to admit that you're clueless on many things. Mm-hmm. And there's things and there's history on both sides that sometimes you need to be willing to go in with a heart of listening and learning, so that you can start creating the space for somebody else to be willing and interested in learning from you why your perspective is what it is. So if there's a specific area that you're really challenged with, and I'm going to just give you an example. You're really frustrated, and I like to use these examples when I talk about diversity and inclusion because they're typically not saucy. But if you really have a problem with the fact that school is serving lame pizza and they're not cooking it right, and every time that you're going to go bite it, you're expecting this nice little crunchy piece of bread that is going to hold on to that cheese, and you're going to bite and it's warm, and you're frustrated that it's not coming out the way that the package is showing it. Rather than getting upset and going over to the cafeteria lady and saying, or the cafeteria gentleman, the monitors, and saying, your pizza sucks, I'm so mad at you because the pizza's bad. It would be a very different approach if you come and you say to the person that's working in the cafeteria, hey, cafeteria person, the pizza doesn't really look the way that it's supposed to. And then all of a sudden you found out that the oven was bad, but they didn't have anything else to serve. And all of a sudden they're giving you bad pizza, not because they want to give you bad pizza. Or they all of a sudden tell you that they found out that the students wanted pizza and they were the students and giving them the pizza that they wanted, but the pizza turned out to be a dud and nobody likes the pizza that they're serving. But if you don't enter these spaces of conflict, and this is the important thing, we have to address our conflicts that we have amongst our family, that we have amongst ourselves, that we have with people in our community, with compassion towards both sides, understanding that we don't have a full picture on either side, then we're going to start with division, and we're going to create an ambiance of shame, which, don't get me wrong, us having feelings about things is not bad. But the way that we start opening up those conversations could go a really long way, or just absolutely shutting down things. So always starting with compassion and understanding that the same way that you don't understand things, the other side doesn't, is extremely important. So I hope that helped too. Councilwoman
Yes.
De La Isla. Oh, thank you.
I just want to add and acknowledge that it's hard, and acknowledge that everybody is afraid. Acknowledge the challenge of it, and acknowledge that everybody doesn't have necessarily right answers. I think you have to, you do have to put that out there, that nobody's necessarily right or wrong, and that it is difficult, but it is necessary.
Councilwoman De La
Thank
Isla.
you.
Thank you, Jamari. Great question.
How do we reach out to people who are more experienced without being scared?
I'm sorry, your voice broke up and there was this, can you say that again?
Yeah, can you guys hear me good now?
No.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, now.
Do you want me to type it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. How do we reach out to adults who are more experienced without feeling scared?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, it's tough, but I think to remember your list of people with this high level of wokeness. Do you have one or two adults on that list? I would say start with one of those as your partner, and they can also then help you reach out to other adults, and you can do it together, because it is scary. It is very challenging.
Yes, Councilwoman, did I say your last name correctly, Chung?
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you.
Okay, yes, Councilwoman Chung.
Yeah, okay. I have a pretty, I think, specific question to you, Danielle. So, Washburn is a really prominent, like, higher education institution in our community. And as a place that has such significance to our youth, what steps and actions has the university taken to promote a more socially aware perspective?
Well, a few things. I have to go back a couple of years ago. Washburn had a list of core values that didn't include the value of inclusion. We had respect, we had integrity, we had collaboration, but we didn't have inclusion. And so 2 years ago, I think it was in 2018, we created this core value of inclusion. to really signify to the world our commitment to social justice, our commitment to addressing racism, our commitment to making a space where students really are free to be who they are and learn and grow from where they are. And from that commitment falls a whole host of programs and activities. Some are within our faculty in CTEL, it's our Center for Teaching and Learning, to assure that the curriculum has a universal design that allows all students to learn, to our student engagement programs that allow all students to participate, to our student success programs that allow students of all abilities to succeed, and some of our diversity programs that allow us to engage with students, engage with the community, to bring the community in and to bring students together to learn more. So it really just starts institutionally with that core value of inclusion. And as different leaders in the institution address their responsibilities, they're tasked and they're held accountable by the presidents and vice presidents to assure that they are doing things that consistently embody that core value of inclusion.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Councilwomen Van Dalsum and McDonald, do you have any questions or comments with regards to the presentation that you just received?
I do have one question.
Yes.
So would there be any different steps if you were talking about for like disabilities or the LGBTQ plus community?
No, they're not different. And that's why I wanted to focus on these people who are woke and people who still have a ways to go and the issues that are important to you, right? Because there's a way to collaborate again with those woke folks to address just about anything on your list. Part of it is up to you to do that scary part of going to them and saying, this is the issue that's of concern to me. These are the challenges I think we face, and I really think that we can work on them together. Because sometimes we old people, myself included, we have to rely on other people to bring things to our attention and to help us understand why something is most important to them. But after that, we can use our wokeness together to change the world.
Councilwoman McDonald, any questions or comments? I want to make sure that all of you have a chance to engage. Yes.
Yes. So how can I best support those that are close to me that experience racism?
By not being silent. I think it's really important for people, when they can, no matter who you are, to be a bridge for understanding and helping other people understand because of the relationship that you have with them or because the role that you play in their life. So let's say, for example, a student of color that you have known since kindergarten or close with is experiencing a problem or a challenge with a teacher, and you observe it, you might have the opportunity to raise your hand and say, you know, I'm not sure that that's what the person meant, or I understood this person to say, to kind of show your solidarity and to show your understanding and to show your empathy, even when the other person doesn't. Because trust me, they notice that. And they notice that you are that significant bridge. And if something is happening to somebody and you notice it and you see it and they are not raising the issue, you might be able to raise the issue on their behalf or raise it for them, or to talk with them about what's a good strategy for building a coalition to raise that issue. So I guess be that bridge, use your leadership, stay informed and stay engaged, and do as much listening as you do speaking, and demonstrate that you are educating yourself, demonstrate that you're learning, demonstrate that you're trying to get to a certain level of wokeness, and there'll be others who admire that in you and will want to do it too.
You know, Councilwoman McDonald, another huge thing that you could do is, I think that one of the biggest issues with cognitive dissonance, which is that we say things, but then we do something else, is the fact that nowadays, what we consider racism is not what the people that are older than us considered racism. So for individuals that lived through Emmett Till, that lived through the horrible things that happened in our community, the thought of racism is this immediate persecution of vindictiveness. So therefore, when you talk about issues of race, people automatically get very upset because they don't see themselves thinking in those horrible negative ways. But what ends up happening is that in rooms where they are with peers, conversations end up happening that expose that implicit bias that is very negative. And they'll say things that are called microaggressions that they would never say to somebody face to face, or they'll say something that is completely inappropriate, or they'll ask a question that is completely inappropriate that somebody feels very sensitive about, but then they don't speak up. And one of the things that you could do to be a great ally is not embarrass that person in front of everybody. It's just, especially when you're in that group that that person feels safe, educate them. Because what ends up happening is that typically the minorities, whether it's the LGBTQ community, whether it's the disability community, whether it's people of color, they end up having to constantly, on top of having to deal every single day with those really uncomfortable comments of, you know, making you feel like, why did you say that to me? And they have to educate. So there's a lot of frustration sometimes that comes along. And as an ally, one of the beautiful things that you could do is pull somebody aside and say, hey, can we talk about something? I don't think that you understand what that meant to this individual potentially. And it maybe didn't mean this, but here's what this really means. And it could be perceived negatively. And that way you're not putting somebody in a really uncomfortable position to feel shame, right? And then be frustrated that you corrected them. But you're also being very supportive to somebody that maybe they'll go to that person and say, oh my gosh, I didn't know that I said this. I'm so sorry. Could you help me understand more about that? So there's many ways for you to be a bridge. There's a lot of ways for you to be able to be an ally. And these are critical and great questions that you guys are all asking. So I know that we have Chief Wheelis that's still here to do 2 presentations for us. But I don't want to really cut really short the conversation. So I want to do like a lightning round to see if there's any other questions or comments that you guys want to run really quick before we transition to the other 2 items that we have on the agenda. Okay, seeing none. Ms. Danielle, thank you so much for investing in our young people. I will make sure that if there's any questions that remain, I will pass on those questions onto you, if you would be okay with that.
Absolutely. And I just consider this the very tip of the iceberg of these conversations. None of these can be had quickly or one time. So I can come back, I can invite colleagues, we could have a conference, whatever it is you all would like to do. I'm woke and I'm here for you.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us. And you're welcome to stay or go, whichever you want to do. Yes, Chief Wheelis.
Hey, before you got rid of Danielle, I just wanted to, I really enjoyed the presentation. I didn't want to step on the kids either. They did a great job with questions, but I'm a student of history. So I just wanted to say one specific kudo. Thank you very much for bringing forward the historical basis of Black Lives Matter, because I don't think that gets a lot of credit, that it actually was a group of African-American females that started that movement that's international now. So I'm a big student of history. So I just wanted to tell you that, and I've studied the movement's historical background too. And I think that's one thing that doesn't get talked about a lot. So I wanted to give you the kudos for that, especially with the makeup of the youth council being largely female. So that's a big thing. So kudos to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. It's wonderful to meet you all. Believe it or not, I have another meeting to go to. So again, I just look forward to this being the start of many conversations. And thank you so much for the invitation.
I was on mute. Yeah, thank you. So we now move on to the next topic, which again was a request of the Youth Council. And that topic is gun violence. It seems that the council for the last 2 years has been extremely interested in the topic of violence in our community and how youth can become involved. So with that, I will pass it to Chief Wheelis to do his presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the Youth Council for having me here. I just wanted to give you 2 little background pieces on me. One, I've been a police officer for 28 years in this community, and 2 of the things that I did along the way in my career that were both on my bucket list when I started as a rank and file officer was to work undercover narcotics, and I did that for 2 years, and to be a homicide detective. And I was a detective for 8 years, and I was a homicide detective for 6 of that 8 years that I was a detective. So I know quite a bit about both gun violence and also drugs in this community over the last basically 3 decades. But we'll move forward from there. So I wanted to let you know that because the slides I'll kind of follow, but I'm kind of more of a free flowing thing. So feel free to ask any questions, or you can hold them to the end, and we'll take a little break in between the 2 presentations between gun violence and drugs. But the first slide I want to talk to you about, this is basically just the vision statement and the mission statement of the police department. And I think it's important because I think you need to understand where we come from, what motivates us on a daily operation, and what our role is in the community and making things better. So of the vision statement, the 2 pieces I always like to pick out are provide a safe environment for those citizens who live, work, and play. And that's really what it is we're out 24/7, 365. When everybody else is going about different parts of their lives, we are constantly working. And our main goal is to ensure public safety and enforce laws fairly and equitably. So those are things. The other piece I like to talk about in the vision statement quite a bit is we constantly evaluate and improve our efforts. And I think there's a lot of what Danielle said that we'll talk about. Everything is a work in progress. Everything can get better when you're dealing with people and communities and things like that. So those are the 2 important parts I wanted to touch on in the vision statement. And then of course, the mission statement basically is our guiding values. And I wanted you to all hear me say impeccable integrity, enduring professionalism, and immeasurable honor, because those are pretty high standards, but that's the standards that we strive to do every day in the most difficult and challenging situations. So I think that's important. Next slide. Okay, now we'll go into some statistics, and I promise I won't spend a lot of time on these, but I am kind of a stat guy. And I think it's important that you kind of know the numbers because you see the trends. The numbers, specifics aren't so important, but you need to understand that we're not guessing when we talk about these trends. We do a lot of effort into tracking them over multiple years. And when we see trends that continue over several years, those are the ones that really concern us. So you've got a number of categories here that all pertain to violent crime and gun statistics over the last 2016 through 2020. And we'll kind of break that down as we move forward. And you can see there's just a lot of guns that are taken, and we'll kind of move through it. But one of the things you can see in 2020, the police department sees 636 crime guns, which is the all-time record. And every year for the last 5 years, that record's gone up. So we'll talk about why that's such an important stat as we move through. Next paragraph or next slide. Hopefully next slide. There we go. One of the big things, obviously, when we talk about gun violence is the homicide rates. And you can see we had 25 in 2020, 2017 was the all-time record. And that's for as long time as we've held stats of 30. The majority of all of the homicides that we have from year to year to year are firearms related. We do have other homicides of other methodologies, but the vast majority are firearms related, which is why the gun stats and the crime gun stats are such an important specific. I can tell you my personal experience with dealing with, obviously, every time we have a homicide, it's impactful to the community. It erodes everybody's feelings of safety. But I can tell you from the years that I spent in rooms with families of people who were killed in violent acts that it's absolutely devastating to the family groups. And some of them, quite frankly, never recover from it. The justice system, even with successful conclusions as far as prosecutions, never make up for what they lost. And so I think when I go through the numbers, I always like to impart my own personal experience because I have had the experience of sitting in lots of interview rooms with families and on the worst day of their entire lives. And I can assure you that it's it's utterly devastating. There's just no other words for it. So I'm glad that you folks are taking the lead here, and I'm glad that you're asking about gun crime, because I want to give you some information that you can take back and be impactful to your peer group. Next slide. As we talked about before, 636, you can see the crime numbers go all the way up from in 2016, just shy of 400 guns seized, and now we're at 636. So in the course of that time, 200 and almost 50 increase in guns. Every year it's gone up for the last 5 years, to be the record year last year. The reason why that's so concerning for us, and I did have the definition of crime gun there too, because I think we have to make the distinction. There are a lot of lawful gun owners who practice responsible things. What I'm talking about is crime guns. Crime guns that involve guns that were seized in criminal investigations, criminal activity, criminal organizations. So that's the numbers that we're talking about. So the reason why this trend is so concerning to me as a police officer and a citizen in this community is because it relates directly to the number of volume and frequency that the officers and citizens are coming into contact and seizing firearms in our community. And the last little note that I have there is we're seeing a trend in the last couple of years that is even more concerning inside this of what I would call atypical calls where we're seizing firearms. We've had a lot of shopliftings lately over the last couple of years where the suspects have been armed. We've had a lot of car burglaries where when homeowners confronted the people that were breaking into their cars in the middle of the night, that the suspects were armed. Those are things that we are seeing that are not in normal situations over my career where we would encounter armed suspects. So those are the kind of things that are very, very concerning to us and certainly contribute to the overall numbers and the increase of guns that were taken off the streets. Next slide. Again, and the shooting numbers bear out the same trend. You can see from 1654, and we're basically up. We had 88 last year. If you do a rough number comparison of that, that's essentially 7 a month. So, you're just a couple shy of 2 a week. When you really break those numbers down, that's when you get to be really, really concerning. I mean, this is a big city, but if you're talking somewhere around 2 shootings a week for the entire year, obviously you have to acknowledge that you have a gun violence crime problem at that point. So next slide. So having given you the number basis for the discussion and the trend that we're talking about over the last few years, what is the police department's response to that? What do we do on a normal thing? Well, the number of prongs that we have to start off with is the field operations. The 911 calls come in about the incidents, the uniformed officers that you see, the uniformed and marked cars respond, we hold the scenes. But then where it goes from there is the Topeka Police Department has detectives 24/7, all 3 shifts, 365 days a year, the weekends, holidays, callback that are always available to follow up. We have the crime scene techs, just like you see on TV, that are available to process those scenes. So all of those resources go to crimes of violence and other crimes, but crimes of violence when we talk about the homicide unit. So those are kind of the 3-pronged response that most of you have general knowledge of. But as it specifically relates to our agency, it's important for you to understand that there's always investigators and crime scene techs available to follow up on these calls. Next slide. So that's the police department response. What's the legal, the court system, the judicial system response in regards to that? And there's a couple points I wanted to talk about to you here, because our district attorney, Mike Kage, has currently proposed some legislation and has been working on it for a while to make the district court criminal penalties of convictions of felons in possessions of firearms, or those people who've been convicted of a prior felony that then get caught in possession of a firearm, which they're prohibited from having by law, making those penalties at the district court level similar to what the federal court level is. And that also ties into the next point, which is sentence enhancements for criminal convictions that relate specifically to violent crimes involving firearms. So while there are certain other conversations about other penalties that are less, focusing on the penalty enhancement areas for violent criminals that are in possession of firearms specifically. And the last thing I think we got to talk about too, that the legal system does, is to more holistically deal with what we're talking about here. Because when you deal with a lot of people that are in a cycle of domestic violence or substance abuse, addiction, there's treatment programs, there's diversion programs, but every year in this community, like so many other communities, we have shootings and we have homicides that are related to domestic violence. And we have a portion of our community that are caught in this cycle of domestic violence. And so the court system has some programs to intervene in those things, as well as, substance abuse and diversion programs and treatment. Those things all have to try to be interrupted to break the cycle, because incarceration alone is simply not the answer. Historically, it's been proven to be that. So those things are an important piece too. So the court system is not always just about locking someone up. It's also about sometimes identifying cycles and patterns and treatment programs and diversion programs too. And I think we're getting better with that. And I think the better that we get as a society and a group, I think Shawnee County does a really good job, but the more work we can do in those alternatives is something definitely to focus on as well. Next slide. And so that brings us to one of the things I'm very excited about right now, that we kicked off this year. And I see the mayor up there kind of smiling a little bit, and I know the city manager is aware of this too, but strategies against violence everywhere. And so we're always going to have traditional law enforcement functions. I'm the chief of police. I'm always going to be talking about reducing crime through the traditional strategies, but we have to look at alternative methods to deal with things holistically too, to deal with people and groups holistically that are outside the traditional focus areas, because I will be the first one that tells you that you can't always arrest your way out of a problem. I've seen it in the 30 years. So strategies against violence everywhere is something I wanted to talk about specifically. It's definitely a great partnership between law enforcement, the community, and lots of different leadership groups here in our area. This is a national program that we've adopted. The Center for Peace and Justice, the district attorney's office, has taken a lead role and even allocated money and staffing to get this program off the ground. But essentially what it does, it looks at group violence intervention, both post-incident, prior incident, and prevention for future incidents. And the way it does that is it tries to have community members, law enforcement, and support and outreach services all interact with groups and individuals who are identified as being potential violent of the future based on past incidences to interrupt that cycle. And like I said, this is a national program that's had a great deal of success at other places. So we're very excited about it coming here. We're very excited about what it may do for our community and to help, because when you help individual parties that are stuck in these cycles of violence and addiction, that ultimately translates into helping the community overall. So I wanted to make sure that we highlighted that program, so that, because I know a lot of it's about change. And so there are traditional methods, but we are growing in how we deal with things as well. And we're always open to solutions of a different vein. Next slide. And these are all the partners, and I thought it was important to put that on there so that you could see that it very much is a community group. It is a law enforcement group. It is a Center for Peace and Justice, JUMP. You have Vale Hospital and Leadership Greater Topeka. So we've got, what that shows you is we've got a lot of very smart people, a lot of community civic minded people that are very interested in this program and where it can go. And I'm certainly excited enough among them to bring it up in this forum and any forum that I get a chance to as we kick it off. Next slide. Okay, so here we are at the Youth Council. So I've told you what the police department does, and I've told you what the courts do, and I've told you about some of the community engagement and outreach pieces that we're bringing together. But I bet the biggest question that this group has, because you guys are a bunch of demonstrated young leaders, is what can you do? What can you do about gun violence in this community? And man, do I love you for asking that question, because we need more of that. But see something, say something. We've got a number of things. I've got it all here on the slide. We can get you all this information. There's any kinds of different technology ways to get that information out there. I certainly don't need to preach to this group. I'm sure that you've seen there have been active shooters in school situations and different businesses all over the country that have prevented by one person doing a tip about a gun in a locker or in a backpack. We've seen that play out. So the best thing that we can do, it's very similar to Danielle with the social change. It starts with one person. And that's what I would tell this group too. You're going to be in places and see things and talk to people that I don't have the ability to contact with, or the mayor doesn't have the ability to contact with. So we need you to take this message out there. If somebody sees something with a gun or anything that violent that can be prevented, let us know so that we can intervene. And I think with that, we'll go one more slide, but I think that's the end of the gun presentation. Yep. So do we have any questions I know I kind of went through that kind of fast and did some stuff, but I kind of wanted to leave some time for some questions and just hit some high points. So is there any questions I can answer for you on gun violence before we move to drugs?
Question from the governing body with regards to gun violence in our community and all the data that you guys received. I know it was a lot. Councilman Williams, Jamari.
Yes, I heard you was talking about community, how ways to get out in the community. What are you really focused on in the community? Like what parts of the community are you really looking from youth leaders? Like how can we do that to help you guys?
Great question. You know, we do a lot of things from school resource officers in the schools to the TCALC program where we have a law enforcement career track, to the Explorers program that's available from 14 to 20 years old, that you can come in and learn a great deal about the law enforcement experience on the way thing. We have volunteers in police service, VIPs, et cetera. So there's a bunch of programs that we do both in the schools and outside of the schools. But I would encourage you to take part in any of those programs that are available, learn more about the police department. The Citizens Academy is a great experience as well, which teaches you about all kinds of different aspects of the law enforcement agency here in the city. The sheriff's office has one as well. So there's a great deal of information.
Could you elaborate to them with
which
regards
part?
to how they can join the police academy, the Citizens Academy, and when they can apply and all that process? Because I think that that's an amazing program.
Yeah, I absolutely can. I think the VIP program, or not the VIP program, the Explorer program would be more specific to this age group. And I think that's a great thing. And I almost threw a slide on there about that, but I definitely can get you guys some information on how to apply for that. And it is an application process, but it's what they do is they meet once a week and they go through different areas and they do community service projects and they learn about, for example, you'll get to see the SWAT team, or you'll get to see the bomb unit, or you get to see the canine unit, or you get to see the crime scene techs run through a mock scene. You'll get to meet with detectives, working detectives, and go through some investigation, some mock things like that. So it's a very interactive experience. It's not just a classroom lecture type thing, but I absolutely can get the direct information on how to apply to that to the mayor if any of you are interested in that. It's a great experience. And to be honest with you, we have a number of current police officers who started out as explorers because obviously you have to be 21 to be a police officer.
Okay, thank you, Chief.
Sure.
Good question. Councilwoman Young, Chung.
I was just wondering, what solutions exist to like help alleviate this dramatic rise in shootings and gun seizures? Because there seems to be a pretty large problem with that at the moment.
I agree. I mean, that's one of the things that we're hopeful that as we move towards regular crime reduction strategies and traditional investigations and incarcerations, that it can be augmented by that Strategies Against Violence Everywhere program that deals with people and services and breaking cycles, lifestyle choices, and those things. That's the big program that we're hopeful outside of the traditional just methodology of police work of investigations and arrests. But the big ideas too is to have these kind of conversations too. I don't think we can ever overstate having these kind of conversations with the leaders of tomorrow, which you folks clearly are. Some of these ideas we need more ideas and we need improvement on, and we need outside perspectives. So that's what we're trying to do. We're open to ideas. And that's one of the great things about the Explorer program, because not only do you learn from us, but we also learn from you in regards to what the future holds for us. So I would encourage you to continue to do the things that you're doing, but seek out. I thought a lot of what Danielle said was great. Find some adult leaders that you're in areas that you're interested in. And I know the mayor does a great job of mentoring a lot of people in the community. So that's exactly what all of us try to do, is to leave a legacy behind us. So we don't try to say that we have all the answers, but we come in and we roll up our sleeves every day and we go to work because we love this city and we want it to be better than it is every day. I can tell you that's why I chose this career path 28 years ago, and it's not one I regret at all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'll put a plug for the chief. I know that the city of Topeka has been focusing on recruiting a lot more minorities and women into the police department. So if you guys do know any young lady or any individual of any minority group, disability, LGBTQ, whatever, that is interested in participating, it is extremely important that, you know, for our community that we have representation, because there's really interesting conversations that we could have if we have those groups within our departments that will help us continue being a place where everybody feels that they belong.
Well said. That's exactly right. And we are getting better, and we put a lot of efforts, expanded our recruiting from a geographic area. We recruit at a lot of primarily minority colleges in the South. We travel a great distance now to recruit as far as we can to try to get as much diversity as we can, because everybody, it's just better if the police departments represent the communities diversity wise as much as they possibly can. And that's something that we continue to work on. So.
Other questions or comments?
Yes, quick question. Sorry.
Yes, Councilman Williams.
Down here, 1 second. Okay. I said, is there a relationship between levels of guns ownerships and levels of crime? I don't know if you understood.
Is there a relationship between
levels of guns
I might need some...
and levels of crime?
Well, and I think that's the, I think that's one of the questions that I get a lot when I start talking about gun numbers. And so I always want to make the distinction. I mean, there's such a thing. And I think all gun owners who would tell you that responsible gun ownership doesn't contribute to crime. But I will give the example of, we have a great number of guns that are stolen out of cars that are left unattended every year. And those guns then come into people's hands and are used for criminal activity investigations, where we then seize them and they become a crime gun. So it's hard not to say that the proliferation of guns in our communities is not part of a contributing factor when you look at the number of homicides and shootings that we have. But there also are statistics when you look at things where responsible, legitimate gun owners prevent violence. So that's a really complicated and layered question, but I know that we certainly spend a great deal of time on education of responsible gun ownership, and that's locking it up and securing it so that they don't end up on the street in people's hands that then become crime guns and add to the problem. So I don't think it's a one-to-one, but I think it's definitely a conversation that has to be had. I mean, I think if we're going to have a real candid conversation, that it's definitely an aspect of it. But I wouldn't want to make a one-to-one, but there are times when people aren't as responsible with their guns, and then they end up in hands of criminals that we end up with crime statistics. I don't think anybody can dispute that. It's a great question.
Thank you.
Loving the energy of this group tonight. Very engaged. Any other questions before we move on to the presentation of drugs in our community?
I wanted to ask one question, and I hate to put you on the spot here, but could I just ask a question? Have any of you in your encounters, because I believe that you guys see things and that we don't see and have information that we don't have. So if you don't want to, feel like I'm putting you on the spot, but if you do, by a show of hands, can you show me if you have seen anybody in your peer group in the last year that's had a handgun? Okay. I was just curious for my own standpoint.
This is wonderful. This is great conversation. And Chief, the same way that the students, if they want to have conversation and maybe off camera and just sit down with you, the youth council itself, to maybe collaborate with you and maybe learn a little bit more about how they could be a participant and you know, ask questions that may be delicate questions that, you know, that they maybe don't feel that they can ask right now. I'm certain that you or somebody in the force would be open to sitting down with them as the youth commission or as the youth council, so that they can then further have deeper conversations with the police department and continue contributing to be change agents of positivity in our community.
I'll be interested in that if possible.
We don't ever tell the mayor no. Go ahead.
I said I'll just be interested in that.
We always say yes to the mayor when she says stuff like that, sir. Yeah, no, it's a great point, Mayor. I mean, we would love to have the conversations wherever they take place. I mean, that's the whole point of having SROs in the schools and community police officers out of the community, and just officers that stop by and play basketball or throw a football around or whatever. Anytime you get to have a community conversation, that's better for all of them.
Wonderful. Well, Chief, if you could now go into talking about drugs in our community. Okay. And I think we'll go, and there's a number of slides here, and like I said, we'll kind of go through them. I won't bore you with stats, but I do think overview wise, I mean, Topeka is a big city. We do have any of the drug types that they have in any of our major cities. From coast to coast and the middle of the country, there are some drug trends that are a little bit different in the middle of the country. But for just general knowledge base to start the discussion, these are the two big categories, Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 of the controlled drugs that we see around here that are the most prevalent illegal drugs in our community. You can see the Schedule 1s, marijuana, hash, ecstasy, or K2, which I'll show you if you don't know already, is basically synthetic marijuana that's been synthesized, and so they call it K2 or cannabinoids. Schedule 2 is opium. You've seen a lot of things about opioids and prescription medication abuse, and we'll talk about that later. Crack cocaine is just a base form of the cocaine powder. Methamphetamine is probably the biggest hard drug that we run into around here. Marijuana is by far and away the most prevalent drug that we have in this community, but methamphetamine is probably the biggest of the Schedule 2. The prescription medication and the opioids thing is on a rise, and something that we'll talk about here in a minute that's very, very concerning. But we also have PCP and heroin, which I think is a little surprising to some portions of our community that we have that here in Topeka, but I can assure you that we do. The highly addictive Schedule 2 is the more addictive category as far as that goes. Next slide. And we'll get into some details as we move through this presentation. Marijuana, and you got a number of names for that. There's probably 100 more. I learned one or two new ones every time I talk to them, and you guys are probably laughing because I'm sure you know some different names and things from there. But you can see that there's all kinds of different edibles and oils and beyond the traditional just smoking of marijuana that there is now. Next slide. And we'll kind of go through a little bit of general education stuff for each type of drug, and then we'll move through some of the other things that the police department does and how we deal with it. Marijuana is most commonly smoking, but we now have edibles and all kinds of different candies and all kinds of things. The points that I wanted to make to you, the drug paraphernalia that's listed on there, this is by far and away the most prevalent illegal substance that we have here in our community. But one of the points I wanted to make to this group that I think is something that's not always talked about, that I wanted to make sure I did in this forum, is a lot of times with the marijuana, the joints, and even some of the pipe type stuff, you're more concerned about what the marijuana is laced with that you do not know.
I mean, we have had marijuana in this community that has been laced with everything from PCP to cocaine to methamphetamine to embalming fluid. It was known on the street as wet or dank. If you can imagine, that's what they used on dead people, and people were smoking that. And a lot of times people didn't know when they were passing a joint around at a party what all was in it. So the important lesson I want to get out to you and your friends is when things are being passed around at parties, you're not always sure whatever else is in it. And marijuana, especially joints, have the ability to be laced with just about anything that you can think of. And the effects of PCP and embalming fluid, ingesting it into your system, are very hazardous and very long-term from both a mental perspective and from a physical perspective. So decisions that you make as youngsters can have long-term impacts on you moving forward. So I wanted to talk about that. And actually the last point on this marijuana slide was actually some recent cases that we've had here in Topeka and the Kansas City area where they were actually lacing marijuana with Raid and other pesticides around the house. And you can imagine the psychological damage that does when you smoke it. So I wanted to tell this group in regards to that, outside of the marijuana legality debate, the logistics of using and ingesting something that you are not sure where the source is or who it came from or what else is involved in it is something that I really want to caution you to think about. Next slide. There we go. Synthetic marijuana, or K2, is kind of the bottom packets of picture. Looks like tea. It's got different kinds of like potpourri and different things like that. The top pictures are mostly ecstasy. And I want you to pay attention to the top pictures, what they look like, because what do they look like? They look like kids' vitamins, and they look like just happy-go-lucky pills. And I will tell you, in my law enforcement experience, and especially my undercover narcotics work, those things were done with the intent to be marketed to younger age groups and party groups. So, I mean, one of them is like the Homer Simpson one. So you can't tell me that the organizations that do these are not trying to market them to juvenile and younger groups. So we need to be aware of that. Next paragraph, or next slide, sorry. So K2 is synthetic, like I said, it's talked about as synthetic marijuana. You smoke it just the same. The issues that the criminal justice system has with K2 is that when they change the formula of it, the synthetic makeup of it, the law is behind the technology. So it bans it based on a certain chemical composition. They change that, and then it's outside of the law and it's legal. The reason that I make that point is because it's outside of any regulatory agency whatsoever when they change these chemical compositions. So when you buy and use this stuff, you have no idea what the chemical makeup of it is, because there's no regulatory agency to it, because it moves the chemical makeup of it as they do. So just really, really, really stay away from all of this stuff, but really stay away from this stuff, because one of the things on there, you see the kind of the things that occur to you if you ingest it. It's got some really, really bad impacts on it and some long-term brain damage type trauma. So really, really be careful with that. And like I said, they're in the innocuous little packages that don't look like they're going to be anything that hurts you. But I can assure I've seen people on very bad reactions from this. And it's sometimes it's things that people don't recover from. Next slide. And like I said, there's ecstasy. And like I said, the aliases you see, okay, we got Scooby Snacks and Skittles. So, you know, with what it looks like and the names that they call it with, it's obviously packaged and targeted for this. And this is a big thing that we see in a lot of bars and clubs and things like that. The negative health effects, you guys can all read all of those as well, but don't be fooled by the innocuous nature of what it looks like. It is dangerous stuff. Next slide. Heroin. Yes, we do have heroin in this community. Yes, heroin is as bad as it gets from an addictive rate and from the long-term health effects and from the high overdose rate. And there's a great number of facts. It's completely synthetic. It can look like everything, and that's why I kind of gave you some of the pictures. It can look like anything from the white powder to the brown powder to the black tar is kind of the center picture. And you can, basically, it's a very versatile substance. You can inject it, you can smoke it, you can snort it. And all of those side effects are there in regards to that. The biggest issue with heroin, like so many of the other drugs, is you really have no idea the level of purity. In this community, we seized everything from 20% pure to 80% pure. And obviously, with just the general knowledge of the math, the higher the purity rate is, the higher the overdose rate is. And one of the things we've seen too is we've seen heroin and other things laced with fentanyl, which is a really, really bad combination as well too. So just wanted to give you some general knowledge of that. But that and the next slide, we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. Cocaine, these have really long-term health effects for you, both short-term and long-term. I'm sure you guys have seen cocaine powder, and that's generally what it is. The crack cocaine is just a freebase portion of it. The reason why crack cocaine was, and this was what was more popular when I was working undercover. This is what I bought a lot of when I was in that role as a law enforcement. And the reason why it was so popular was it was cheaper. The high was more intense, and it was all just about the form of the drug. Next paragraph, or next slide. Methamphetamine what is now and was the most common here in the Midwest area. At one point, when I was still in narcotics, there was a lot of individual labs. People were making it themselves in bathtubs and smaller versions of it. Now it's primarily a business of larger drug organizations, and even some cases international. But it's popular. It replaced crack cocaine and actually cocaine quite a bit in the times that I was in narcotics to when I transitioned out to a detective. And it was all because it was cheaper. It's just basic economics like anything else. It was replaced by a cheaper version where the high lasted longer. People could make it themselves. And so that's why it became more popular. It has had some longevity in this area. We still have methamphetamine seizures on a regular basis. I threw some pictures up here because, as you can see on some of those, and I don't know if you can read the print, but the lowest portion of theirs, I mean, you can really see the physical debilitating effects. The chemical makeup that this stuff is made out of actually eats you from the inside out, is essentially what it is. So it's a very addictive substance. It's a very devastating and destructive substance for you to ingest. And it looks a little bit like the crack cocaine. Pipes are the same way as far as smoking and stuff goes. And we've had some recent cases of these laced with fentanyl as well that leads to a very high overdose rate as well. Next slide. Prescription drugs, and I saw the mayor shaking her head up and down. I know that she's aware of this. I mean, this is probably one of the scariest things that we have going now, and not just here in our community, but nationally and internationally for that matter. But the biggest problem we have is there's legitimate uses for prescription medication, and that helps people with pain management and all kinds of different things. But there's also a very illicit use of it. We've had a huge upsurge in addiction. It's a very complicated process because, like I said, there's legitimate uses for it. So, and there's a lot of it out there in this country. So don't think just because it can be just as devastating. It can be just as addictive. It can be just as destructive to the long-term futures that you bright leaders have. And so I appreciate the opportunity, not only as the police chief, but as a dad, to be able to present some of this information to you, because I think the more we can have these candid conversations, there's a lot of stuff out there that everybody just needs to stay away from. And I definitely would say that to this stuff. Next slide. So what do we follow in the same track? What does the police department do? There's all these bad drugs. The police chief just said so in our community. What are the police doing about it? As you can see, here's the assets and the resources that we have within the police department. We talked about the narcotics unit. We also have the canine unit. with dogs trained specifically for narcotics detection, vehicles, houses, hidden compartments. When we serve search warrants, you can see that's the response team is what we call it, more commonly known as the SWAT team. Those are the ones that go and serve the warrants at the drug dealers' houses and et cetera in regards to that. Next slide. So those are some of the traditional methods that we use. We also have a complete unit of police officers and investigators who are tasked with nothing but addressing the illegal drug distribution networks in our community. Shawnee County Sheriff put together a Shawnee County Drug Task Force, which the Topeka Police Department and many other small communities are a group of, which allows us to consolidate, coordinate our resources across the entire county. Because I can assure you, like a lot of other criminals, drug dealers do not care about where the city limits are or where the county line is or where the next little town is. So that was a big piece for us, getting all of the intelligence and all of the different narcotics units from the different organizations working together in one thing. And we've seen, as you see in the headlines from time to time, you see different search warrants that are executed in regards of that. The I-70 drug corridor, we obviously work with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation and the Highway Patrol on interdiction of larger shipments of narcotics that go up and down the interstate as well. All working hard, hand in hand, trying to stem the tide of drugs into our community. Next slide. Beyond that, so I basically went through the local response, the county response, the state response, and now we'll talk a little bit about the federal response. We have federal task force officers for the ATF, which does the firearms cases, the FBI, which does bank robberies and other cases, in the U.S. Marshal Service that has wanted fugitive. We work with all the agencies at all levels to incorporate as much resources as we possibly can in coordination to deal with these efforts, because these organizations span across state lines and across sometimes international borders. So the more information and the more cooperation and collaboration we have. So I only put those series of slides together so that this group would understand it's not just the local police, but the state police, the county sheriffs, the federal agents that are all working together with obviously the prosecutors at all levels to address the drug problem, because people's lives hang in the balance of the work that we do, not only in our community, but in all the communities across the country. Next slide. Some different examples. I thought you guys might be a little curious as to some of the different things that the narcotic investigators from the different agencies use. And we get tips from a wide variety of things. And the single biggest, which I always have to give a shout out, the single biggest way we get information is tips from the public. That's where most of the narcotics investigations begin at all levels. And sometimes an investigation starts at the local level and ends up being a international drug conspiracy that started from one person in their community who said, not in my block, not on my city street. And so that's what I wanted to encourage you guys about that stuff. So I love that you asked me to talk about this, but it does make a difference. And it sometimes starts with a very grassroots level. Next slide. So what we can look for? I just told you that citizens are very helpful to us, right? And there's only so many police officers, and we need everybody to be watching all the time. And I put on every presentation I do at least 4 or 5 times, see something, say something, and the Tell TPD website, so that you guys can remember that one and do this. But what do I look for, police chief, if I'm looking for things? And obviously everything's a little bit different, but here's some general things. If you see short and stop and go short-term traffic coming out, if you have unusual odors in your neighborhood, around the businesses, could be marijuana, could be chemicals, visitors at unusual, any kind of patterns that are out of the ordinary, or people meeting in unusual places at unusual times. There's a lot of illegal transactions that go down in parking lots, and anything that seems out of place, you're going to know because you live in the community and you know your neighborhood. Make sure you call us and let us know. Next slide. And again, I think that's the last one. You know, the biggest piece of the chain in this whole thing is the community, an engaged and active community that communicates with their police department and lets us know about things that are out of sort in their neighborhood. And that triggers right into the community outreach piece. And one of the favorite things that I say, and I always like to point this out, Sir Robert Peel back in the 1800s said that the police are the public and the public are the police. And to me, that means two different things. It also means that the public has to be engaged in keeping their community safe, and also that the police officers are fathers and mothers and daughters and sons and sisters, and we live in the community and we raise our families here, and our families go to school here and work here too. So we have just as much vested as anybody else does. So I always like to throw out that this guy way back in the 1800s basically had the idea of community policing that still continues with us today. Next slide. I think that I'll turn it back over to you, Madam Mayor.
All right, now is a chance for all of our students to, I'll say before I open it up, Chief, there were things that I had never seen in my life that I was just shocked by. So thank you for this presentation, because I don't think that it was just informational for our students. I had an education today. So thank you so much for your candidness. I saw Brent, like me, just like leaning in like, oh my gosh, what? So thank you so much. Now to the students, the floor is yours. What questions do you have of Chief with regards to the issue of drugs in our community? What are things that resonated with you? Anything that you would like to make a comment about? This is your time. Councilwoman Chung.
From what communities do you usually see the most like drug-related crimes?
That's one of the things about, that's one of the things about drugs, especially with the opioid crisis. And I'm just going to call it what it is, the opioid crisis that we're in. There's not one section of the community that's not, the easiest answer to tell you that is there's no part of this community that's not impacted by some of these drugs at one level or another. And I appreciate the mayor's comments, but I'm always very direct and candid when it comes to this. And that's because of my undercover background, because for a couple of years, I lived in a world that is very different from what most people's world is. And I always like these opportunities to be as direct as I can, because there is no part of this community, to answer your question, that is not impacted by drugs. There is not, it's not one affluent community, one poor community. There are every families in every cross section, across every gender, ethnic group, religious background that are implicated by drugs, because you can have somebody who thought they were smoking an innocuous marijuana cigarette that was laced with something that could be from anywhere in this community. And if they have the wrong experience and end up in the hospital or the morgue, to be quite frank, that there are singular incidences of trying drugs. Don't let anybody ever tell you that that's not the case, that result in death. Sometimes you can make a singular mistake that can cost you that bad. So I guess the answer to your question is, I wish there was some corners of the community, in any community, that weren't impacted by drugs, but that hasn't been my experience in 28 years.
Other questions? This one was
That's actually why. Go ahead.
No, I was saying this, everybody's like sitting here just looking at the screen, but I think that this one was heavy. Thank you for that.
I did have one.
Mayor, I think you gave me some great advice. If there's anybody that wants to have some conversations with me offline, I know I dropped a lot on you, but that's one of the reasons why the narcotics investigator was such a big piece for me to do in my career, because I've seen the destruction that it causes. So I'll be happy to talk to anybody in a more private setting too, anytime.
Councilman Williams.
Yes, quick question for Chief Brian. I was listening, you was mentioning narcotics was like a big problem in our city. How can we as youth leaders, as we grow in the city, how can we help not only the city, but how can we help how can we help how does youth leaders help you for other occasions? Like, how can we make this not a problem? Like, what is the solution that youth leaders need to do?
I think it's a lot, to be honest with you. I think it's a lot of the same things that we about with social change and some of the other things. Have the courage to share your experiences and to stand up and say, don't do this. If you do this, share your experiences. You're going to be in places, locker rooms, hallways, parties, where we're not going to be. So, and you're going to be encounter this stuff. Share the experiences that I shared with you. Share the education piece that you have seen what these things look like, and that things, simple marijuana cigarettes can be laced with things. Get that information out to places that I can't get it to. And that's exactly what I need from you. But, you know, and any other ideas, I love the ideas of you guys taking the message. And if there's anything that I can ever do to assist you, you're asking how you can help me, but I offer my assistance back. Have the conversations with your peers, with those that look up to you, those people that you mentor. Have the candid conversations about this stuff, because and have it before there's a tragedy, not necessarily after.
Okay, thank you, Chief Brian.
Other questions or comments? You know, things that, you know, shocked you from the presentation today.
They do have that look, don't they?
They do have that look. It's like, poke me, we're done. Well, Chief, thank you so much for being with us. I tell you, I sincerely learned a lot from your presentation, and I am already getting indication that you will be reached out to, because there is more conversation that is intended, not just with this group, but I think that with the larger commission also, that you could have like a roundtable. The commission has, I think, 40 students, and not that many. Okay. So the commission has more students that would be involved and interested in sitting down with you and talking. So I'm getting sign language that I don't understand. But that being said, at this point in time, before we wrap up this meeting this evening, each of you has an opportunity, if you want to make a comment or an announcement of an event that you're having in the community, an event that the Youth Council or the Youth Commission is working on, that you want to share. This is your time to share it. Being informed is 20+ people in the commission. So, all right. So if there's no other comments, we will have our next meeting. I will look forward to the leadership of the Youth Council to let me know what else they would like to see on the agenda. These meetings are quarterly, so please communicate with Trey and with myself so that we can get you the individuals that you would like to have speak and the topics that you would want to have discussions about. I am very grateful for Danielle Dempsey-Stokes, and especially for Chief. You work all the time, and the fact that you have stuck with us for almost 2 hours just demonstrates how important it is to you to have conversations and engagement with our young people. Like I always like to say, people say our young people are our future. I say they're our now. And this is why this group is so important to me as well. To the youth commissioners, to the council, I just want to say thank you for showing up, for being engaged, and for being desirous of having these really critical conversations. And they're not comfortable conversations. I know that there's many of you that might have been listening to comments either from Danielle's presentation or from one of both of Chief's presentations, that you were thinking of people in your life that either you've known that, like in my case, I have a dear friend that died because that person had an opiate addiction. And it's something that I will always carry in my heart, you know, and so I'm sure that all of you were talking about these things and you were thinking about a situation that you know, and that's heavy. So thank you for sticking with this. It was a deep meeting, and I look forward for the next meetings to be just as deep and as rich. But most importantly, not just having the conversation, for you guys to make use of the resources that you have. Your chief of police is standing right here with you saying, I want to keep talking with you. A professional in diversity and inclusion did the same thing for you. So please make sure that these conversations don't just stay here, but that you amplify them not only with the council, but also with your community. So with that, if there is no other items in front of the agenda, our next meeting is going to be May 25th. I hope that we have all of you and the rest of the council available. The next one after that is August 31st, and the final meeting of the year will be October 26th. So with that, the meeting is adjourned, and I will see you all on May 25th. Have a wonderful evening.